The biggest mistakes are never made in the dark. They're made in broad daylight, when someone believes a badge is all the proof they'll ever need. The afternoon sun settled over downtown Baltimore, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk where commuters gathered beneath a weathered bus shelter, each person lost in the familiar rhythm of another ordinary weekday. Cars rolled past in steady waves. Traffic lights changed with mechanical precision, and the city moved without noticing the quiet woman standing near the schedule board with a slim leather briefcase resting against her leg. Camille Brooks checked the arrival time on her phone before slipping it back into her pocket, her expression calm, patient, almost unreadable. She wore a charcoal blazer over a simple blue blouse, practical shoes instead of expensive heels, and nothing about her appearance demanded attention. That was exactly how she preferred it. Only 45 minutes earlier, she had walked out of a federal building several blocks away after a confidential meeting that very few people even knew had taken place. The documents inside her briefcase carried the kind of legal authority capable of changing careers, exposing corruption, and rewriting futures, but no one waiting at that bus stop could have guessed it. To them, she looked like another professional heading home after work. Across the street, Officer Daniel Whitaker leaned against his patrol vehicle, watching the afternoon crowd with the confidence of someone who believed experience had taught him everything worth knowing. For nearly 15 years, he had worn the same uniform, driven the same streets, and trusted his instincts more than policies printed in thick department manuals. When his eyes settled on Camille, something about the scene caught his attention. She had been standing there quietly for several minutes, occasionally glancing down the road, never speaking to anyone, never causing the slightest disturbance. Yet in Daniel's mind, ordinary quickly became suspicious. He stepped away from the cruiser and crossed the street with measured confidence, his polished boots clicking softly against the concrete as nearby. Conversations faded into curious silence. Camille noticed him approaching long before he reached her, but she remained exactly where she was, shoulders relaxed, hands visible, showing none of the nervousness he expected to see. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, stopping only a few feet away. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" Camille offered a polite smile. "Waiting for the number 12 bus." It was a simple answer, delivered without hesitation, but it seemed only to deepen his skepticism. He studied her briefcase, then looked back at her face as though searching for a story that wasn't there. Around them, people pretended not to watch while quietly paying attention to every word. A college student lowered his earbuds. An elderly couple paused their conversation. A city bus driver pulling into a nearby stop glanced toward the shelter through his windshield. Camille could feel the weight of unfamiliar eyes settling over the moment, yet her voice never changed. She had spent years inside courtrooms where calm mattered more than volume, where patience often defeated anger before either side spoke twice. Daniel folded his arms. "Can I see some identification?" he asked. Camille met his gaze without raising her voice. "Officer, may I ask if I've done something wrong?" The question lingered between them as traffic continued flowing only yards away. Daniel answered with practiced certainty. "I'm asking the questions." Camille slowly reached for her wallet, careful and deliberate, but before she could remove anything, Daniel's attention shifted to the seal embossed on the corner of her briefcase. His expression hardened, convinced he had found something worth investigating. Camille looked directly at him and spoke with quiet confidence. "Officer, I believe you're about to make a very expensive mistake." Camille slowly opened her wallet with deliberate movements, making certain every gesture remained calm and visible. She understood that moments like this could change direction in seconds, not because of facts, but because of assumptions. Officer Daniel Whitaker watched every movement with narrowed eyes, convinced that confidence itself was suspicious. Instead of allowing her to hand him the identification card, he raised his hand slightly. "Leave it where I can see it," he said in a firm voice. Camille nodded without argument. "Of course, officer." Around them, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. The college student who had removed his earbuds quietly reached for his phone. The elderly couple exchanged uneasy glances before stepping a few feet farther away. Even the city bus driver remained parked at the curb longer than necessary, sensing that something ordinary had suddenly become unusual. Daniel looked at the leather briefcase again. The embossed federal seal immediately caught his attention, But rather than accepting the possibility that it belonged to her, he interpreted it through his own assumptions. "Where did you get that briefcase?" he asked. Camille answered without hesitation. "It belongs to me. Do you have proof?" His tone had become noticeably sharper. Camille met his eyes. "Everything inside identifies me, but I would appreciate handling those documents carefully. They are official government records." Daniel gave a brief, skeptical smile that never reached his eyes. "We will decide what is official." Those words settled heavily over the small crowd. Nobody interrupted. Nobody stepped forward. They simply watched, uncertain whether they were witnessing a routine police encounter or something that would soon become much larger. Camille noticed every expression around her, yet her attention always returned to Daniel. Years inside federal courtrooms had taught her that composure could be more powerful than emotion. Every sentence mattered. Every reaction could later become evidence. She took a slow breath before speaking again. "Officer, I am cooperating fully. May I ask why I am being detained?" Daniel answered without looking away. "I have reasonable suspicion that something is not adding up." Camille glanced toward the nearby traffic camera mounted high above the intersection. Its small lens pointed directly toward the bus shelter. A second camera overlooked the sidewalk from the transit authority building across the street. She quietly noticed both without drawing attention to them. Daniel, however, remained focused only on the woman standing before him. He asked for her identification again. This time Camille carefully removed a leather credential holder from her wallet and extended it toward him. Before opening it completely, Daniel looked at her face once more, almost expecting fear. Instead, he found patience. That unsettled him more than resistance would have. He flipped open the credential and immediately paused. His eyes stopped on the federal emblem before moving to the title beneath Camille Brooks' photograph. For only a fraction of a second, uncertainty crossed his face, but pride quickly pushed it aside. "Anybody can make something look official," he said, closing the credential. Camille remained remarkably calm. "That credential can be verified in less than 2 minutes." Daniel shook his head. "We are not finished here." As another commuter quietly began recording from a respectful distance, the afternoon breeze carried the sound of an approaching bus somewhere beyond the next intersection. The ordinary day continued for everyone else in Baltimore. But at that small bus stop, every passing second was quietly transforming a simple encounter into a moment that would soon be examined far beyond the city limits. Daniel Whitaker slipped the credential back into its holder without acknowledging what he had read. Instead of verifying the information through the dispatcher, he placed the credential on top of Camille's briefcase and stared at her with growing certainty that she was somehow deceiving him. "You expect me to believe this?" he asked. Camille answered with the same measured composure that had never left her voice. "I expect you to verify it. That is the professional thing to do." Her response drew another wave of quiet attention from the people nearby. The college student continued recording from several yards away without interfering. The elderly couple remained under the shelter, speaking only in whispers. The city bus finally arrived at the curb, its brakes releasing with a soft hiss before the doors folded open. Passengers looked outside, immediately sensing the unusual silence surrounding the stop. The driver, Marcus Reed, recognized Camille almost instantly. She had ridden his route several times after meetings downtown, always greeting him politely before taking the same seat near the front. He looked toward Daniel and asked calmly, "Officer, is everything all right here?" Daniel answered without turning around, "Keep your passengers on the bus. This is official police business." Marcus gave a slow nod, but his eyes returned briefly to Camille. She simply offered the slightest reassuring smile, silently asking him not to escalate the situation. The doors remained open while several passengers watched through the windows, uncertain whether to leave or remain seated. Daniel picked up the briefcase. "What exactly are you carrying?" Camille responded immediately. "Confidential legal files protected under federal procedures. They should not be opened without proper authorization." Daniel frowned. "That sounds convenient." "It sounds like federal law," Camille replied. The words landed quietly, without anger or sarcasm, yet they carried a confidence that made the surrounding silence even heavier. Daniel believed he was still controlling the encounter, but every decision he made was slowly narrowing his own options. High above the intersection, the traffic cameras continued recording every movement. The transit authority cameras overlooked the bus shelter from another angle. Several nearby businesses maintained security systems aimed toward the sidewalk. None of those cameras cared about opinions. They simply captured facts. Camille understood that better than anyone. Throughout her career, she had built complex federal cases from details far smaller than this. She knew how timelines were reconstructed, how recordings were synchronized, and how simple conversations could become powerful evidence when viewed frame by frame. That knowledge allowed her to remain remarkably calm. Daniel, however, remained focused on proving that his instincts could not possibly be wrong. He reached for his portable radio but hesitated before requesting any verification. Something inside him resisted the possibility that the woman standing before him might actually be telling the truth. Pride often speaks, louder than procedure. Camille looked directly at him and quietly said, "Officer Whitaker, every public employee has difficult days. This does not have to become one that changes your career. Verify my credentials before making another decision." For the first time, Daniel did not answer immediately. The afternoon breeze carried the sound of distant sirens several blocks away, while sunlight reflected from the federal seal resting on the leather briefcase in his hands. Around them, complete strangers sensed that they were witnessing more than an ordinary police stop. Nobody knew exactly how the next few minutes would unfold, but the growing silence carried a feeling that truth was steadily catching up with assumption, one careful decision at a time. Daniel finally lifted the portable radio toward his shoulder, and for one brief moment Camille believed procedure would prevail over assumption. Instead, he lowered it again without pressing the transmit button. His decision was not based on evidence. It was based on certainty, the kind of certainty that grows when pride refuses to make room for doubt. "You can save the explanation for later," he said as he carefully set the credential holder on top of the briefcase once more. Camille looked at him steadily. Verification takes less time than paperwork after a mistake. Daniel ignored the comment. He motioned toward his patrol vehicle parked only a short distance away. "I need you to come with me while we sort this out." Camille did not move immediately. She was careful not to challenge him, not because she lacked confidence, but because she understood how every decision in a public encounter would eventually be examined. "Officer," she replied calmly, "am I free to leave, or am I being detained?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "You are being detained until I determine exactly who you are." The words settled over the bus stop with remarkable weight. Several passengers still seated behind the large windshield exchanged uncertain glances. Marcus Reed remained behind the steering wheel with the doors open, quietly observing everything. His years driving public transit had taught him to recognize the difference between a routine stop and a situation that would soon make headlines. This felt like the second kind. Camille gave a slow nod. "Then I respectfully request that you document the legal basis for your detention." Daniel frowned. "You seem to know a lot about police procedure." Camille answered with quiet honesty. "It is part of my profession." He dismissed the statement with a slight shake of his head. "Anybody can say that." At the edge of the sidewalk, the college student continued recording without speaking. A young mother waiting several feet away gently guided her son closer to the bus shelter, hoping to avoid standing in the middle of an uncomfortable scene. The city itself continued moving as though nothing unusual had happened. Delivery trucks rolled through green lights. Cyclists crossed the intersection. Office workers hurried toward parking garages, unaware that an encounter lasting only a few minutes was steadily becoming something far larger. Daniel picked up the briefcase once more and examined the federal seal. This time he noticed the small identification number embossed beneath the emblem. It appeared genuine, professionally manufactured, and remarkably difficult to counterfeit. For the briefest instant, uncertainty returned to his expression. Camille noticed it immediately. "Officer Whitaker," she said softly, "there is still an opportunity to verify everything before this goes any further." Her voice carried neither anger nor triumph. It carried something much stronger, patience. Daniel looked directly into her eyes, searching for hesitation, for inconsistency, for anything that would justify the conclusions he had already formed. Instead, he found composure so complete that it only deepened his frustration. He believed calmness was an act. Camille knew it was discipline. Above them, another city camera quietly tracked the intersection, preserving every passing second without opinion or emotion. Time itself had become a witness. Daniel finally reached for the rear passenger door of the patrol vehicle and opened it. Please step over here, he said. Camille gathered her belongings with deliberate care, making certain every official document remained secured inside the briefcase before following his instructions without resistance. As she walked across the sidewalk, she glanced briefly toward the reflection in the cruiser window. The faint red marks left by the weight of a long workday on her wrists had already faded, but she knew another kind of mark had just been created, one that would remain permanently recorded in reports, surveillance footage, witness statements, and memories. The people watching still believed they were witnessing the end of an ordinary police stop. None of them yet realized they were actually watching the opening chapter of a legal case that would soon force an entire city to answer difficult questions about judgment, procedure, and the true cost of ignoring the truth. Camille placed the briefcase on the rear seat exactly where Daniel instructed, never taking her eyes off the official documents inside. She understood their importance far beyond the paper itself. Those files represented months of interviews, carefully reviewed evidence, and legal strategies that had been prepared with extraordinary care. They also represented trust, the trust placed in her by colleagues who believed the law should protect every citizen equally. Daniel closed the vehicle door and stepped toward the driver's side, still convinced he was preventing a problem rather than creating one. Before getting inside, he looked once more toward the small crowd that had gathered around the bus shelter. Nothing to see here, he announced. Most people quietly returned to their routines, but not all of them. Marcus Reed remained seated behind the steering wheel of the city bus, making a mental note of the route number, the exact intersection, and the time displayed on the dashboard clock. The college student ended one recording only to begin another from a different angle as the patrol vehicle remained parked beside the curb. Across the street, a delivery driver glanced toward the scene before entering a nearby office building whose security cameras overlooked nearly the entire block. None of those people knew Camille personally, yet each of them had become an unexpected witness. Inside the patrol vehicle, Daniel finally picked up his radio again. This time he contacted dispatch, requesting a routine records check using the information printed on Camille's credential. His tone remained confident, almost casual, as though he expected the response to confirm every assumption he had already made. Camille listened quietly without interrupting. She had learned long ago that facts rarely needed help defending themselves. They only needed time to arrive. A few seconds stretched into nearly a minute before the dispatcher's voice returned through the speaker. "Officer Whitaker, please confirm the identification number." Daniel frowned and repeated every digit carefully. Another pause followed. The silence inside the vehicle felt noticeably heavier than the traffic outside. Camille remained composed, looking through the windshield toward the bus shelter where strangers slowly dispersed into the rhythm of the afternoon. Finally, the dispatcher spoke again, but this time the voice carried an unmistakable change in tone. "Officer Whitaker, please remain on the line. We are verifying federal information." Daniel's expression tightened. Federal information was not language normally associated with ordinary identity checks. He glanced sideways at Camille, searching her face for some sign of satisfaction. Instead, he found only patience. She folded her hands calmly in her lap and looked straight ahead. "Verification is always better than assumption," she said quietly. Daniel chose not to answer. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had begun to compete with uncertainty. Less than 2 minutes later, another voice joined the radio transmission, introducing itself as a federal communications liaison. The request was simple. The officer was asked to confirm his badge number, patrol assignment, and current location before taking any additional action. Daniel answered each question carefully, no longer speaking with the same certainty that had marked the beginning of the encounter. Camille recognized the procedure immediately. Somewhere inside a federal office, someone had already realized that one of their attorneys had unexpectedly become the subject of a local police detention. The timeline had officially begun. Every transmission, every report, every recorded minute would soon be preserved. Daniel slowly lowered the radio without saying another word. For the first time since walking across the street, he realized the encounter was no longer being measured only by his judgment. It was now being measured by procedure, documentation, independent records, and people far beyond the boundaries of that quiet Baltimore intersection. Outside, the afternoon sun continued sinking toward the horizon, but inside the patrol vehicle the balance of the entire situation had begun to shift. not because anyone had raised a voice, but because the truth had finally started introducing itself. Daniel kept his hand on the steering wheel, but his attention remained fixed on the silent radio resting beside him. Nearly every instinct that had guided him through years of patrol work was telling him to regain control of the situation, yet control was quietly slipping away with every passing second. Camille remained seated beside the secured briefcase, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, her confidence grounded not in emotion but in certainty. She had spent her career watching facts untangle complicated cases, and she knew the process had already begun. Another transmission interrupted the silence. This time the dispatcher's voice carried unmistakable urgency. "Officer Whitaker, please remain at your current location. A federal representative has requested direct communication. Do not transport the individual until further notice." Daniel answered with a short acknowledgement, but his expression revealed something new. Doubt had finally entered the conversation. He looked toward Camille once more. "You knew this would happen," he said quietly. Camille turned toward him with the same calm expression she had maintained since the beginning. "I knew my identity could be verified. That is all I have been asking for." Outside the patrol vehicle, the city continued moving as though nothing extraordinary was taking place. The bus that had waited several extra minutes finally pulled away from the curb, but Marcus Reed did not simply forget what he had witnessed. Before leaving the stop, he noted the exact time displayed above the windshield and quietly informed the Transit Operations Center that a police incident had delayed the route. Across the street, the college student uploaded a portion of his recording to secure cloud storage before slipping his phone back into his pocket. He did not know whether anyone would ever need the footage, but something inside him said it should not be lost. Meanwhile, inside a federal office several miles away, the communication chain accelerated. Nathan Cole, one of Camille's colleagues, had just stepped out of a meeting when his secure phone displayed an unexpected notification. A routine identity verification request involving Assistant United States Attorney Camille Brooks had immediately triggered an internal alert because of the sensitive legal assignment she had attended earlier that afternoon. Nathan stopped walking. He read the notification twice before dialing the verification center directly. Less than 1 minute later, he had confirmed Camille's location, the responding officer's identification, and the fact that local authorities had initiated a detention before completing credential verification. He gathered 2 federal investigators already working nearby and instructed them to proceed immediately to the intersection. Back inside the patrol vehicle, Daniel finally broke the silence. "If everything checks out, this can still be cleared up." Camille nodded slightly. "I hope it can. Accountability is always easier before small mistakes become large ones." There was no satisfaction in her voice, no attempt to embarrass him, only a quiet reminder that professionalism had opportunities long before consequences arrived. Daniel lowered his eyes toward the credential resting beside the briefcase. For the first time, he carefully examined every detail instead of searching for flaws. The photograph matched perfectly. The federal seal was authentic. The security markings reflected exactly what his training had described years earlier. He realized he had spent more time questioning the person than verifying the evidence. A cool breeze drifted through the partially open window as late afternoon sunlight reflected across the dashboard. In the distance, a dark government vehicle turned onto the avenue and steadily approached the intersection. It obeyed every traffic signal, attracted no unnecessary attention, and moved with quiet purpose. Camille noticed it first, but said nothing. She simply looked ahead, knowing that sometimes the strongest reveal did not arrive with flashing lights or raised voices. Sometimes it arrived with people who trusted facts more than assumptions, and who allowed the truth to speak for itself. The dark government sedan came to a smooth stop several yards behind the patrol vehicle. It did not arrive with flashing lights or dramatic urgency. Its presence alone seemed to quiet the entire intersection. Daniel watched through the side mirror as 3 professionally dressed officials stepped out with measured confidence. They carried no visible sense of panic because they did not need to. They carried certainty. Nathan Cole led the group across the sidewalk, his identification already visible in his hand before he reached the driver's window. Daniel lowered the glass halfway. "Good afternoon, officer," Nathan said in a calm, professional tone. "I am Nathan Cole with the United States Department of Justice. We received a federal verification request connected to Assistant United States Attorney Camille Brooks. Daniel felt every word settle heavier than the last. Before he could answer, Nathan continued. We are here to confirm her identity and ensure all federal procedures are properly followed. Daniel slowly looked toward Camille. She remained exactly as she had been since the encounter began, composed, respectful, and silent. She offered no interruption and no expression of victory. Nathan briefly turned toward her. Ms. Brooks, are you all right? Camille nodded once. I am fine. Thank you for coming. Nathan acknowledged her answer before presenting an official folder through the open window. Inside were multiple identification documents, federal assignment records, and a photograph matching the credential Daniel had already examined. Every detail confirmed exactly what Camille had told him from the very beginning. Daniel carefully reviewed each page. The signatures matched. The identification numbers matched. The assignment date matched the confidential meeting that had concluded less than an hour earlier. There was nothing questionable left to investigate. The uncertainty that had slowly replaced his confidence now became unmistakable reality. Nathan spoke with the same measured professionalism. Officer Whitaker, Assistant United States Attorney Brooks, has been traveling on official government business this afternoon. Her identity was fully verifiable through normal procedure before any detention decision became necessary. Daniel lowered the documents into his lap without speaking. The silence inside the patrol vehicle seemed louder than any argument could have been. Outside, several people who had remained nearby quietly watched the conversation unfold. Marcus Reed had completed his route, but another transit employee, having heard the radio discussion about the delayed stop, stood nearby observing from a respectful distance. The college student recognized the federal credentials immediately and discreetly continued preserving his recordings. Camille finally spoke, her voice steady and remarkably gentle. Officer Whitaker, I told you verification would answer every question. Daniel met her eyes for only a brief moment before looking away. For the first time that afternoon, he understood that the encounter had never depended on hidden authority or unexpected influence. It had depended on a simple professional decision that could have been made within minutes. Nathan accepted the credential holder from Daniel and returned it to Camille with great care. She placed it back inside her wallet before securing the briefcase beside her. The official documents had never been removed, never displayed for attention, and never used to intimidate anyone. They had only waited for the truth to catch up. As late afternoon sunlight reflected across the windshield, the atmosphere around the patrol vehicle changed completely. What had begun as suspicion had become confirmation. What had begun with assumptions had become documented fact. And standing quietly in the middle of an ordinary Baltimore street, every person present had just witnessed something many people spend years forgetting. Real authority rarely announces itself loudly. It simply waits for the evidence to speak first. Daniel stepped out of the patrol vehicle with noticeably slower movements than before, as though every decision now carried a weight he had not felt only minutes earlier. Nathan Cole closed the federal folder and thanked him for cooperating with the verification process, but the professionalism in his voice could not erase what had already happened. Camille gathered her briefcase, adjusted the strap over her shoulder, and stood quietly beside the patrol vehicle. She did not rush away. She did not celebrate being proven right. She simply looked across the intersection where the afternoon crowd had begun returning to its normal routine. Nathan glanced toward the nearby traffic cameras before speaking softly. We will need to preserve every available recording from this location. One of the federal investigators immediately made notes, identifying the city cameras, the transit authority cameras, and several businesses whose security systems overlooked the bus stop. Marcus Reed walked back from the bus shelter after completing the passenger exchange on the following route. Excuse me, he said respectfully. If anyone needs a statement, I was here from the beginning. Nathan thanked him and handed him a business card. Moments later, the college student approached with equal hesitation. I recorded part of the encounter on my phone. I did not interfere, but I thought it might be important. Nathan accepted the information with appreciation. Please keep the original files exactly as they are. Someone from our office will contact you. Daniel listened quietly as each new witness voluntarily stepped forward. None of them appeared angry. None of them were trying to embarrass him. They simply believed the truth deserved to be documented. That realization settled heavily over him. Camille finally broke the silence. "Officer Whitaker, I hope you understand something." Daniel slowly looked toward her. "Go ahead." She spoke with remarkable sincerity. "This was never about winning an argument. Every person deserves the same careful verification before assumptions become official actions." Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "I should have verified first." They were the first words he had spoken that afternoon without certainty, without defensiveness, and without authority. Nathan nodded slightly, but remained focused on procedure. "The department and the city will conduct their own reviews. Our responsibility today is simply to ensure the facts are preserved accurately." Camille understood exactly what he meant. Investigations were never built on emotion. They were built on timelines, reports, recordings, witness statements, dispatch logs, and documented decisions. Every minute of the encounter had now become part of an official record. Before leaving, Nathan quietly informed Camille that the confidential legal meeting she had attended earlier had already been rescheduled to protect the integrity of the ongoing federal work. She acknowledged the update with a simple thank you before securing the briefcase inside the government vehicle. As the federal team prepared to leave, Daniel remained standing beside his patrol car, watching the intersection where everything had begun less than an hour earlier. The bus stop looked ordinary again. Commuters checked schedules. Traffic lights changed. Conversations resumed. Yet nothing about the afternoon would remain ordinary for those who had witnessed it. Within days, official reviews would compare dispatch recordings with body camera footage, surveillance video, written reports, and independent witness accounts. Attorneys representing the city would begin evaluating legal exposure. Internal investigators would examine whether established procedures had been followed from the very first question asked at the bus stop. The encounter had ended quietly, but its consequences had only just begun. In the world of law, the loudest moment is rarely the one people remember. It is the first documented decision that cannot be taken back. The weeks that followed unfolded with the quiet precision that Camille Brooks had trusted throughout her entire career. Investigators did not rely on assumptions. They relied on records. Dispatch recordings were synchronized with body camera footage. Traffic cameras were matched against transit authority surveillance. Security video from nearby businesses filled every remaining angle. Witness statements from Marcus Reed, the college student, and several commuters all described the same sequence of events with remarkable consistency. The timeline left very little room for interpretation. The first request for verification had come only after critical decisions had already been made. Internal investigators reached the same conclusion. Established procedures that could have resolved the encounter within minutes had not been followed at the beginning. The city commissioned an independent legal review while federal officials completed their own examination of the documentation. Months later, after careful negotiations and extensive review of the evidence, the city approved a civil settlement totaling $4,700,000. Public officials emphasized that the agreement reflected the specific facts of the case and the legal risks identified during the investigation. For Camille, however, the number itself was never the victory. The true victory was something much quieter. The settlement required updated verification procedures, additional professional training, and stronger documentation requirements designed to reduce the likelihood of similar incidents in the future. Those changes would affect officers, supervisors, and citizens long after headlines disappeared. Daniel Whitaker also faced the consequences of documented decisions. Administrative reviews examined every report, every transmission, and every available recording before reaching their conclusions. He accepted responsibility for failing to verify information when verification had been readily available. The experience changed the course of his career in ways he had never imagined on that ordinary afternoon at the bus stop. Months later, during a community meeting focused on public trust, Daniel quietly admitted something that surprised many people in the room. "The hardest lesson I learned was that confidence is never a substitute for confirmation." Camille happened to attend that meeting as a guest speaker. When their eyes briefly met across the auditorium, neither spoke about the past. They no longer needed to. The official record already told the story with complete accuracy. After the meeting ended, Marcus Reed approached Camille with a warm smile. "I still remember that afternoon," he said. "I almost drove away without thinking twice." Camille smiled back. You stayed long enough to pay attention. Sometimes that is exactly what justice needs. The college student who had preserved his recordings eventually completed law school, inspired in part by witnessing how careful documentation could influence meaningful change. He often told classmates that truth becomes stronger when ordinary people choose not to look away. As another Baltimore evening settled over the same downtown streets, commuters continued waiting beneath the familiar bus shelter, buses continued arriving on schedule, and traffic lights continued changing with quiet predictability. Most people passing through that intersection had no idea an ordinary afternoon there had helped reshape important procedures across the city. They simply saw another bus stop. Camille saw something different every time she passed it. She saw proof that dignity never depends on the opinion of a stranger. It depends on the courage to remain steady until the facts have the opportunity to speak. Because a badge may grant authority, but only integrity earns trust. And when truth finally arrives, it does not raise its voice. It simply makes every assumption answer for itself.